All right, we're live. It's my favorite part to watch the attendees roll in.
Right.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon as you're showing up here. We got 3 marks on the call already. Good to know.
Let's see. All those marks. All right, go ahead and jump in the chat and introduce yourselves if you're bored while we're waiting here to get started. Hey, Jenny. All right, get started in about 1 minute.
Hey, Jenny, welcome.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started while a few people are still trickling in. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bill Conforti. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Association Analytics virtual discussion series. Our goal here is to bring together association professionals with industry leaders to bring value to the community. In this series, we'll have one-on-one discussions, expert panels, product overviews, and other educational sessions to drive further discussion on data and related topics, and ultimately help us drive performance and better serve our members. And of course, we want to do that in ways that's fun and engaging, and allowing all of us to learn from each other in the process. This is a bi-weekly series, and we meet on Thursdays at 3 p.m. And the recordings for all the sessions will be available to those who register. During the session, we'd love to hear from everybody. Please use the chat tool to introduce yourself if people doing that already, which is great. You can also use the Q&A button to submit questions for our panelists. And quick reminder, when you are chatting, remember to change it to all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, people won't be able to see your message. Okay, so today we're revisiting a topic that's been top of mind for all of us throughout 2020. We're going to talk about virtual events. So previously, we've discussed how to pivot to a successful virtual event from things that have been previously on site, using some of the information collected from our live events, plus our learning data and other data as well. But as we plan our 2021 events and as we move into the 2021 event season, we have the benefit of knowing that in most cases sorry about that, Siri. We have the benefit of knowing that those events are going to be virtual, and we can plan accordingly. So without the uncertainty, we can be more confident in our decisions about how we plan and execute those events. So today we're joined by OpenWater. They're a leader in virtual conferencing as well as application and review for things like awards, abstracts, scholarships, etc. So today I'm going to be moderating and maybe jumping in to ask a few questions along the way. But the majority of the talking will be from Greg and our good friend David from OpenWater. So let's go for some introductions. Greg, let's start with you.
Fantastic. So thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. Excited to see all the names on the list here, lots of friendly people and some new people I haven't met yet. So my name is Greg Pollock. I'm the VP of Sales here at Association Analytics. And I've been working my whole career with and for associations. I started on your side of the table at an association and at nonprofits. And then I was quickly tempted over to the dark side. And I've been working at solution providers ever since. I'm fairly certain I've done every role you can do in a software company at this point, from implementing and project managing software to product development. And at some point I got roped onto a sales team and have been there ever since. I'm excited to present to you about meeting technology today, because when I started working in software companies, it was all about meeting technology. It was about registrations and trade shows and mobile apps. And now that we have virtual events at our doorstep and we're using them more, we have more and more data to be able to analyze. And we're going to be talking about that today. David?
All right, hey everyone. My name is David Noyes with OpenWater. I appreciate all of you taking the time to join with us today, and appreciate Association Analytics as inviting me and OpenWater to talk today. I'm the director of sales here at OpenWater, so I see some of our customers are in the chat now and some people we've talked to before, so you've probably talked to me or some of my team. But looking forward to walking through kind of what it is that we do to help organizations go virtually today, and how that might work with what Association Analytics, our friends over there do as well.
Okay, yeah, let's go to the next slide. I think been introduced enough. So just what we're going to cover today, really quick introduction. We're going to talk about the application and review process with OpenWater. We're going to talk about virtual conferencing platform that OpenWater offers. All of this is a way to plan your event, of course, and generate a lot of data that can be used for many purposes, but also for planning future events. All right, so leveraging conference data. Greg's going to walk us through some live software in today's webinar. Then we'll wrap things up with some closing thoughts and some takeaways. Okay. All right, so this is really all we're going to do by way of introduction, right? Which is to say, as everyone knows, the event landscape has changed. As we mentioned already in the introduction, in 2020, it was about pivoting from what had always been, or in most cases had always been, live in-person events. We pivoted to, partially, or in most cases, fully virtual events. And and our experience is that for most associations, that went pretty well. Or at least all things considered, went better than expected. We saw that most had increased attendance, if slightly less revenue. But overall, it kind of changed the way that they'll do events, going forward, right? So glad to hear this is a quote from Forbes, basically saying that the virtual event, or the hybrid, hybrid virtual and live event is here to stay even after the pandemic restrictions are lifted. All right, so a quick poll question to get us started here. So compared to previous years, your 2020 meeting engagement was what? More, less, about the same as previous years, or you just don't know? So we'll give you maybe 30 seconds or so to weigh in on this. We'll just hang out here for a sec and wait for the responses. If anyone has something interesting or notable to share about their virtual event experience in 2020, we'd love to hear about that in the chat, and we might be able to to work that into our discussions going forward.
I'm gonna do a little foreshadowing in a minute. When I get to my piece, we're going to talk about some surveys that you can get at your event. If this were a physical event, we'd be standing in front of all of you. You'd be raising your hands. And unless we took pictures of everybody raising their hand, we'd have no idea what the answers were, who answered what. In the virtual world, we now have insight into what percentage of people said what, and we can easily tie that later back to registrations and who said what. So interesting little foreshadowing there about what we're going to talk about in a minute.
So real quick, Matthew had a question in the chat. Does meetings mean all programs, small and large, or just conferences? I mean, for these purposes, we're talking about all programs, I think, but we do understand that not every single event that you had previously would necessarily be pivoted to a virtual event. So, okay, so with the results in, about around 20%, 19% said that there were more engaged. A lot of people said less, a little over half, about the same and don't know, checking in at around 15%. So I would wonder, as a follow-up question, right? So we could spend a whole hour just on this. As a follow-up, I would wonder if that lower engagement was actually lower engagement, or maybe there are some things that that you didn't measure, or that were just done differently than in years past. So just David or Greg, you guys have any comments or on the poll results?
I think one interesting thing that I've seen a lot is to answer Matthew's question here, what does it really mean to have engagement at meetings? in the past, engagement at meetings meant we had one big physical conference that was a week long. We all flew to a specific place to do it. I think in the virtual world, we felt free to have a lot more smaller events that were maybe more niche or maybe catered to people who weren't necessarily going to the annual conference on a regular basis. So I would say let's double down on that, and let's make sure we continue to create meetings that engage our members where they are, how they want to be engaged about topics that matter for them, not necessarily say everybody who wants to engage with us at our meeting has to fly to the city, has to stay in a hotel, has to participate physically at the meeting. I think providing more opportunities to engage is critical.
Yeah, and it's as we segue into the next section here, I would submit maybe that if engagement was less, I mean, it's in some ways a natural consequence of the fact that you didn't really plan to have a virtual meeting, right? I mean, you planned to have an in-person meeting, had to pivot to something virtual, which in some cases just involved, standing up some Zoom calls. Maybe you didn't necessarily have the benefit of a virtual conferencing application in place. You didn't have the benefit of systems in place to measure and track some of the data that you would get as a result of those meetings. So with that, I think that's a really good segue to David's section. He's going to talk to you about OpenWater software and how having platforms like that can help to reverse that trend, right, to really improve your engagement year over year, and especially over what happened in 2020.
All right, awesome. Thanks for that, Bill. And in response to Lima's question in the chat, I'm not sure if that's supposed to encourage me to say pivot as much as possible in this presentation, or if I should try to limit it, but we'll see what we can do. Really, so starting off, just, for any of you that might not be familiar, and, I won't take it personally if you're not, of just really what it is that we do here at OpenWater. What we do here really devolves into two different product areas that you're going to see today are a little related. On one side, kind of what we've been doing for the past 10 years or so is application and review software. So a lot of organizations will use us things for awards nominations, grant applications, scholarships, abstract proposals, really any workflows where your members are making applications that need to be reviewed or selected by another group of people and then administered kind of by you all as association staff. Really, where this pivoted into virtual events becoming a thing is we work with a lot of associations to handle their abstract and speaker application process for their annual scientific conferences. So this past year, we essentially worked with all these different associations who, as the world came to a screeching halt, we had all of their session data, their speaker data, just all of that just living in our system, and we pivoted that into a virtual conference platform. Because of that, the vast majority of conferences that we personally run are they're all for basically higher ed or nonprofit, and B, they're largely scientific and educational in nature, primarily based on people talking about their research, typically with a very high ratio of people who are at the conference to present and at the conference just as an attendee. So really what I'm going to do today is walk through a little bit of what OpenWater does from an abstract submission, review, and selection side of things, and then also walk through what it is we do after that process is done to take people virtual. But also we do have customers that use us just for abstracts, and we have customers that use us just for virtual conference, even though they do complement themselves pretty well. Pretty much what we do start is with some kind of abstract submission process. Basically, this is pretty straightforward. I'm sure all of you in your lives have seen some kind of web form. And basically, we work with you to set up customized forms where your members and researchers are able to log in and basically fill out whatever information they need to have to present at the conference. Whether there's topics, categories, abstract types, tracks, if they need to add on collaborators or co-presenters, upload documents, really any information that you need to collect can be collected from OpenWater. And we're also able to keep track of, who starts an application, who finishes it, who maybe dropped off along the way, which is kind of a teaser to later of some of the information that we're able to push over to association analytics. We're able to work pretty closely with your association management system as well. So it can set up a single sign-on to make sure that any info you have living in your database, we're able to pull into OpenWater so your members aren't basically inputting redundant data. And we can do lookups as well, where like, for example, if I was trying to put together a session and I wanted to speak with Bill and Greg, I could start typing in Bill's name and it's going to automatically start looking up, the Bill Confortis in that association to make sure that everyone associated in this process is tied to a very specific record, rather than, someone might type in Bill, someone might type in William, someone might type in Will, but this will keep everything essentially hooked together. As the abstracts come in, basically we're able to have reviewing committees or just individual reviewers log into the system and review different applications. So they can see all the different information that that author put in, including documents, text, things like that on the left. This is able to be double blind to make sure that authors don't know who's reviewing them and reviewers don't know who they're reviewing. Customized evaluation forms on the side as well. Typically, once all the abstracts are selected, basically what we're able to do is for certain very academic conferences, we're able to group those abstracts into joint panel sessions. So if you need to have 6 different abstracts grouped together and ordered correctly into one session, we're able to do that. And this can be done by conference staff, which is done in a lot of the cases, or even we have customers that have individual session or topic chairs that are in charge, they're volunteers in charge of doing this themselves.
So can I make a quick comment, David?
Sure.
Yeah, and so I think we're gonna talk about this a little bit later, but just looking at from the perspective of the data that's being generated by this process and what you can do with it, there's a lot that's going on here, right? I mean, first of all, we have the individuals that are submitting abstracts, some being accepted and some not. We have volunteers that are peer reviewing these, and there's some really interesting data in the types and the topics of abstracts that are accepted and which ones are not. And then I would say maybe most importantly, our experience is that most associations that have an abstract process, it's a very reliable indicator of meeting attendance, at least for in-person meetings. So that'd be something that I'd be curious to hear about if anyone has a metric or something like that they use in the chat, which relates to how you use any data around abstracts to plan your upcoming meeting. Okay, sorry, Dave, keep going.
No worries. Yeah, and a lot of what we've had people do as well is a lot of conferences have rules that in order to be accepted as a speaker, you have to already be registered for the conference. And seeing as conference registration can often live in someone's AMS, we can make sure as speaker selections are happening in OpenWater, there can be reports and dashboards to see, all right, who are my accepted speakers that have not yet registered for the meeting, to make sure that they are actually going to show up and participate, because that would be a good thing to know. And then just my last little part before talking about basically going virtual is scheduling. This is something that obviously is going to apply for physical, in-person, and virtual and hybrid events as well, is once your sessions are completed, you can drag and drop them into rooms and time slots. Traditionally, we have done this for only physical meetings and then only virtual right now. But as we start to get organizations set up for hybrid meetings right now, you're actually able to divide your sessions up between physical in-person rooms at the hotel and virtual rooms that are happening online remotely. So just a little bit of just talking about what we've done for the past year. Over the past year, we've run about 250 virtual conferences in the past year. Really, typically where this starts is some kind of public-facing web presence for your association's conference, where we build out a web presence for basically whatever information you need available for your virtual conference. So, logos, name, custom banners, videos, text descriptions in here, scrolling banner ads, links up top to different content you have. It's really pretty configurable content management system here that we basically built out for you. And so whatever information you need available to your attendees, we're able to have here. And it's also configurable to you of where that login wall is and what information you want to be available only to registrants versus available to everyone. Typically, people log into our system using some kind of integration with their existing registration system or AMS. So in this case, we can pretend that we logged in, with our, let's say IMIS or your membership or Personify, NetForum, really any AMS that exists out there, like we've worked with at this point. So typically users will log into the system and they're brought to a view that will look something like this, where basically what you're able to see is an agenda view of just everything that's happening. So you're able to see the different days tabbing across at the top here. People are able to build out their own personal agenda to kind of log in weeks ahead of time before the conference and choose the adventure of what they're going to do during the event, sort, search, and filter, and really find exactly the sessions or speakers they're looking for, whether by category, track, session type, in-person versus virtual versus hybrid. Are there CE credits offered? Is there on-demand content? Things like that can all be basically parsed out. Clicking into an individual session, we're basically brought to a details page about this session in particular. And really, this page can have basically any information about the session that you're looking for. So like in this case, like this session already happened. So there's an embedded video recording of the session after it happened. There's a carousel of speakers down here. We can also have, text descriptions. Some people that have abstracts, we can list out and link to the different individual abstracts or papers here as well. That's all doable. And then on the side here, we have some, different handouts that can be downloaded. Click a button to launch a chat, join the live presentation, things like that.
So David, so a lot of associations would want to have their conference session information available after the fact as on demand. Is this the place where they would do that, or is there, or is that something that they would set up separately?
Yeah, it can really go either way. Like by default, we leave our conference site for up to a year or however long people keep working with us, which we hope is longer than a year.
Sure.
But also like if, you have an LMS or you have some other place where you want this data to go, we can work with you to do that.
Okay, great.
Answering Sheila's question that came in the Q&A, what's the average size of the conferences we've done? It really varies. The way we think about size is typically about total number of sessions rather than total number of attendees, just because when you're virtual, sessions really determines how much content is happening in the system and how many people are almost like a secondary consideration. Average is kind of tough. I'd say like on the smaller end, like conferences we typically work with, like might have 10 to 20 sessions. Typically, if someone has fewer than 10 sessions, you can just pop up like a Zoom webinar link on your website or something like that. But we've worked with conferences that have up to 60 concurrent sessions happening at one time and about 1,000 overall total sessions. But that's obviously a little bit of an edge case. So I'd say average is probably between 50 and 200 sessions for a conference.
That's an interesting perspective, though, and Greg will get into some of this later. It's like, even though some of the data that would go into a central repository or in a product like Acumen is coming from OpenWater, it can be summarized in different ways, right? So you get the data at low levels of granularity, then you summarize it in ways that are useful. So whereas, the event planners, that the ones that are actually, in OpenWater, on a day-by-day basis, they're interested in looking at it at the event level, right? And at the session level. But very often when you look at your data warehouse or your engagement system, you want to look at it by individual, right? So you want to look at individuals and how they interact with different events. You can do both, but it's just the idea that you have that flexibility to summarize the data in really useful ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then if I click like basically join live presentation here, a big part of what our system does is, so we use Zoom as the main AV backbone for the live sessions that are happening, is we basically automatically assign the permissions of how that all works. So for example, like for the webinar we're doing right now, Bill, Greg, and I had a special link that was emailed out that we clicked on to join this as panelists, and you all as attendees had separate links that you were emailed out to join as attendees. Basically what OpenWater will do when you have a conference with, let's say 50 sessions happening over 3 days, there'll be one button to click on, and based on the session data and registration data that we have, it'll automatically push that person into that Zoom webinar or Zoom meeting room with the right set of permissions automatically queued up. So you're not trying to granularly manage permissions for hundreds or thousands of different attendees across hundreds of sessions. Because if you have 1,000 attendees and 100 different sessions, that's actually 10,000 different permissions that are happening throughout the whole meeting. And basically our system does that automatically rather than you or a meeting planner or some poor intern having to do that manually. Everything that's happening in the Zoom sessions, we're able to track attendance, which is another thing that we'll talk about pushing into Acumen. So, like of all the sessions, how many people went to each session, how long was each attendee there for? So you're actually able to get really robust information about who was in each session and for how long, to get good info about, what sessions were the most popular, where was their drop-offs, who's eligible for CE credits, and different information like that. For exhibitors in a conference, we're able to do kind of some similar things, where we're able to set up basically, kind of a grid or list view of the different exhibiting organizations that can be searched, sorted, or filtered. I can see a logo of, who the organization is, description text, when they're available. We've typically found that both from at this point, OpenWater has run a lot of conferences with exhibitors, and we've been an exhibitor at a lot of different virtual conferences, both on OpenWater and not. And kind of a overall theme we found is most exhibitors are not interested in hanging out all day in a virtual conference. So we found that the ability to schedule meetings like within the platform and also having like almost office hours available has been very helpful. Aaron Alexander has an interesting question. When you move from the session to the exhibit, do you have to log back into OpenWater? We used this for our event and the exhibit was not integrated into the same landing page as the sessions. That's interesting. Yeah, using OpenWater for this, it's the same website and the same login. I know we've talked with some people who end up almost MacGyvering multiple systems together for their conference. And a lot of times what happens is someone might have to have 3 different logins to use different parts. With us, it's just going to be one login for the whole thing. And then here, when I click on an individual exhibitor, I can see like a details page here of really whatever information about them that I might need. Once again, going back to our theme today of data, all of the information on this page is trackable, which I think I read Jennifer's mind a little bit in the Q&A about analytics. So we're able to track basically who comes onto these pages, if they click on links in here, if they download white papers, watch a video, click to book a meeting, things like that. That's all retrievable in terms of lead retrieval that organizers can decide to provide to their exhibitors.
Yeah, and this is a massive advantage for for virtual over the in-person events. I mean, just in our own experience, having attended several virtual events this year, just knowing who comes and watches your video or who downloads your brochures, it's way different than people just walking by and grabbing them in a live event, and you obviously would never know who those individuals are. So basically everything that that David is showing you is generating a lot of data that you can use to track and score the engagement of not only your attendees, but also your partners, right? Your exhibitors, your advertisers, and sponsors as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
as someone who often exhibits, I always regret finding business cards in my pocket 2 days later in my jacket that I forgot to log or enter and follow up people on time. So the idea that we can get all of the data of who stopped by in one easy file that we can use, huge for us, because it makes it that much easier for us to focus on having the conversations with you when we're at the booth, not trying to scribble down on a card who stopped by or what we talked about. So that's a really big advantage for us from the exhibiting side. And I think as a lot of us pivoted to virtual events, having exhibitors and sponsors was sort of an afterthought. But I think this is a key area we should focus on. All of us exhibitors have budget ready for these meetings we want to participate in, giving us a landing page, allowing us to put a logo. We made special videos for every event we exhibited at, talking just to those attendees. The ability to personalize and brand ourselves at the event was huge for us. And we're really excited to be able to use platforms that can continue to let us to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And to answer Sheila's question of what type of attendee information is provided, this is really up to you as an event organizer. We can basically give you as the association almost like the kitchen sink of like whatever information you want about the attendee, but like that can be parsed out to the exhibitors. Of like some of our customers are what I would consider amazing and would just give the exhibitors all the contact info possible from the attendees. Other people hold that info much closer to the vest. So it's up to you about how much information you feel comfortable giving to your exhibitors, or even if you tier that out based on different levels of exhibitors. Of like, higher end people get name, email address, phone number. A step down is you just get name and organization and, happy treasure hunting. So like it's really configurable about what you're looking to do there.
Same with exhibitor reports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically those are kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's up to you. Typically, we just do that kind of post-conference to help just organize everything, but it's totally doable.
Good.
I'm going to go real quick through this since most conferences don't have posters. But if any of you have academic posters at your conferences, we can have like a grid view of all those different posters that's searchable, and then kind of a details view about that poster specifically with a link to be able to chat about the poster. And then same kind of analytics that apply to exhibitors apply here of, being able to see who looked at your poster, to see which are the best ones, things like that. And then kind of the last piece of the software that we have for our event is basically like a chat feature built in that almost, if you all are familiar with Slack or Microsoft Teams, it's relatively similar to this, where your users are able to browse an attendee directory and see different people who are attending the conference. They're able to search, sort, and filter. They can click into one person in particular and kind of send one-on-one messages to someone, have a one-on-one video call just in the platform, in this case with Nick, or I can click through to group chat topics as well and have smaller group conversations. A lot of people, like when talking about engagement in the poll earlier, definitely something that's hard to replicate virtually is the fact that like I can bump into Greg in the hall and be like, hey, I haven't seen you in 6 months, like have a conversation there. But something we've seen where interaction has actually gotten better virtually is being able to continue like a focused conversation after a session. Is, the live session can wrap up, people will migrate towards a feature like this of like the core group that's interested in continuing to talk about it. Which we've seen has been really effective, especially for a lot of the academic events that we do. But really, like that's the high level of our software. Like the whole other half of what we do here is services. It's like obviously we're going to set up and configure this whole platform for you. So we're not really a DIY offering. It's more of a white glove service. We can train your staff and presenters on how everything works. And then during the conference itself, we typically have staff on hand virtually just to help make sure everyone's getting in and out of the rooms. All the presenters are feeling comfortable with what's going on. And then for hybrid conferences as well, like something I'm just going to hint at, but not really go into detail, is we're able to have basically AV crews on staff too, to make sure that any rooms you have in person that need to be live streamed can be live streamed out as well. So that kind of combined with the mobile app, like can make sure that there's actually interaction and overlap between what's happening in person and what's happening virtually. But really, that's kind of like the high level of what we do here. It revolves around that online session library and all your content and permissions, and then basically a whole lot of services that our staff provides to make sure the event runs well. But that's pretty much kind of my overall spiel now, and just kind of my last little slide is going to be transitioning over to Greg. This is typically most of the information that we see coming out of OpenWater that often gets pushed into an AMS and kind of ignored, but then could get pushed into something like Acumen and actually do something with it. So, does someone start a submission activity for an award, a grant, or a nomination? Do they complete that submission, or is it left hanging? Are they selected in any way? Were they a reviewer? Were they a reviewer that actually completed their assignments? Or are they reliable? What exhibitors were the most visited? What sessions were the most attended? How long were people in these sessions? Are all kinds of data points that we're able to push out, from OpenWater into something like Acumen, where you can actually do something then with the data.
All right. I think at this point, I'm going to switch over to Greg.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill and David. I want to get it started off by thinking about how things worked in the physical world and what we captured and tracked, and how we can do a better job in the virtual world capturing and tracking the data and then leveraging that. So I want us to think about, how did we collect data during a physical event, and what types of data did we collect? Right, we've got our registration data, we've got our exhibitor data. We might know who's going to what session, but I think a lot of it is, who did you bump into in the hallway? Was that session, were people standing out in the doorway trying to get in, or was there lots of seats available in the back where people wanted to sit? And it was sort of like, if you weren't there to experience it, you didn't have a good sense of what was going on. I think in the virtual world, we have a tremendous opportunity because there's significantly more data that's being captured or that can be captured. Now, I think the challenge we ran into last year is, I talked with a whole lot of associations about how they were pivoting to virtual events, and what they were doing. And what I found was, a lot of people were reacting, and they were saying, I got to get this up and running as quick as possible. If we can pull this off, it'll be a miracle. I'm not really planning for what's going to happen here. Now, this year, we've got hindsight and we've got time as our advantage. We can plan ahead for what types of data we want to collect. So I'd like to see it in the chat. Let me know what your thoughts are. What data are you able to collect from your virtual event that you didn't get from your physical event? If you had a virtual event and you collected data, what's one thing you collected that you had never been able to collect before that was interesting? Or if you didn't, what is an insight you'd like to get from your virtual event that you were unable to get from your physical event? So I want to see that dropped in the chat before we leave today. If you don't have an answer yet, I'm going to walk you through some answers and give you some ideas. And hopefully by the end of our session today, everybody will have a light bulb moment on what types of data they want to collect from their virtual event and how they plan on using it. David, if you want to stop sharing, I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And I'm going to do an overview for you of some of the types of things we're helping our customers with when it comes to their data. As I'm walking you through this, please feel free to jot down or drop in the chat, hey, that's a really good idea. I want to track that because I want the outcomes of what that looks like. And one of the first things I'll suggest is, we're going to start with our meeting overview. What are the key performance indicators? What are the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 metrics that you and your executive team and the board want to look at after a meeting? And let's actually write that on a paper, maybe even do some wireframing. What does that look like before we start the meeting? And are we collecting the data to be able to answer those questions? So with my meeting, I wanted to know things like how many registrations I had, how many dollars in sales I had, what % of my facility did I sell, how many individuals attended, and how many organizations attended. And I wanted the breakdown of all those things. I wanted to know registrations by type. I wanted to know sales over time. I wanted to know what sort of exhibit space we were selling. Did we ever sell the floor out, or were we at capacity? I want to know things like, who were the individuals who attended? And I want to know things like, who were the organizations that attended? I want all of these things at my fingertips. Now, the question is, did we configure our platforms in a way to be able to collect this data? Did we pull the data out? And did we put this in meaningful ways for our executives to be able to analyze? The next couple questions I have are more about the attendees. Who's registering for our event? So some of the insights I'm hoping to get for my event here are, we ask you, was there more engagement or less engagement at the event? And I imagine a lot of us answered that question by number of attendees. And that may or may not be the best metric to measure engagement with, but we need to know, is the number of attendees at our event growing or shrinking? We then need to know things like, how are we pacing year over year? when we advertised and promoted this event, when did attendees typically register? And I talk with a lot of people who do this in Excel right now. But let me show you some of the really cool things you can do when this is in a BI platform as opposed to just in Excel. I don't just have to look at this days and weeks out. I can change this in a number of ways. I can change this from a running total over to a count. Instead of showing me the total number of registrants, show me which days and weeks out really move the needle for registration. And a really big push we had, our marketing team spent a lot of time and effort on it this year. We were really trying to get first-year attendees to our event. How did we do getting first-year attendees to register our event? Were there peaks and valleys? Were certain marketing campaigns we did better? And the other thing our marketing team really focused on was how do we get non-members to attend for the first time? Because what I highly suspect, sorry, that's the wrong flag, is if we can get non-members to come to our event for the first time, they're going to love it. They're going to want more of it, and they're going to want to register for our next event as a member. So it's clear to me that some of our campaigns did a really good job at getting these non-member first-year attendees. Others didn't really move the needle for that. So if we're trying to analyze our data, we want to look at the outcomes we're looking for and how do we measure that in the data to really be able to understand what's moving the needle for registrations. So now we've got people registering. The next question I have is, who are these people who are registering? Oftentimes we have one system where registrations are occurring, and we have another system where we have the demographics and data on those people that are attending. And it may not be until after the event is even over that we combine those two data sets together. Wouldn't it be really important halfway through the event to know what types of people are coming to the event? Wouldn't you want to know things like the demographics or the job functions of those people? You'd certainly want to know if they're members or not. You'd certainly want to know if they're new members or if they've been members for 50 years or not. And you probably want to know things like, how many of those people attending my upcoming event are really looking to renew their certification? I had a great conversation with an executive a couple weeks ago about pre-conference sessions. Remember those fun things, right? We're going to give extra credits. You're already coming to our event. If we can get you to this pre-conference session, we can sell you that extra thing. You can get the credit you're looking for. It's a win-win solution for us. But we don't necessarily know what type of pre-conference sessions we should supply to people. So what I did there is I right-clicked on the attendees. They're already coming to my event. Their certification is expired. They need those extra credits. If we're going to offer a pre-conference session to them, these are the type of pre-conference sessions we should offer. We should have a developer track because we have a lot of developers coming that are looking for those extra credits. And maybe we should even have a developer track focused on people in the private sector, because those types of organizations are really looking for our sessions. How many of those people are there? And ultimately, if I'm going to tell them to come to our pre-conference session, I've got to email them. Who are those people? And that's where analytics comes together, because we can put all of those pieces in one spot. So now we know who's coming, we know when they registered and why, we know all about them. Then we want to start answering questions like, how often do they come year over year? We've got some members and they come year over year to our event, but at the same time, we're always looking to get an influx of new people. How do we do on our loyalty? How often do new people come, or how often do we get those returning users? And if they are returning, how often are they coming? Who's in that like 10-year club that they've come every time for the last 10 years? Or how many prior events does they really come to? Now this gets tricky because somebody in the chat talked about ASAE. We attend ASAE every year, but one year Dylan goes, the next year Merritt goes, the next year Richard's going. It's hard for you to do loyalty on a person. What you have to do then is organizational loyalty. Do we as an organization participate on a regular basis? And this can be really challenging because Greg, the person, registers, but Association Analytics, the company or the organization, is really generating that loyalty that we're hoping to analyze here. All right, so we're starting to execute our meeting. People are coming, they're attending our meeting, and they're going to our sessions. We need to understand more about the learners that are attending our sessions, whether it's in an LMS or whether it's in a virtual setting, maybe we're just using a Zoom. We want to understand the breakdown of all those people, and we want to understand the individual courses we offered. What was the pass-fail rate of that course? What was the sentiment of that course? How many of those people enrolled in other courses after they took it? Again, we're putting all these pieces together to get a really good picture of what happened at our event so we can do better next year. We can report on it. Just because they're not attending a formal LMS doesn't mean you can't get registration data, right? You can get attendance and registration data right from Zoom, and this is important. We pulled this out of one of our Zoom meetings from last year. We understand how many people signed up for the event. Of those people, how many registered, came, how many registered didn't come. We understand things like the average time in the session. I saw a few of you drop off. You're not even here to see me talk about you, but we know who you were. The data tells us that these types of people spent on average this amount of time in the session. And it looks like right here at about that 13 to 15 minute mark, that's where we lost some people. We got to be really exciting. We got to be really engaging at that early stage of the meeting, because according to this data, if I can get you to that 40-minute mark, you're all the way through to the end of the Q&A, right? We've got you captive for that entire event. Now, this data coming directly out of Zoom doesn't tell me more about the people than their name and email address. But think back. We looked at our registration analysis. We looked at our registrant analysis. We looked at their certifications. What if we could tie all this data back? What if we could give you the demographics of the type of members who attended these types of sessions? That's entirely possible because, again, we can blend that data together. So now we know who's in the Zoom meeting. We also did some surveys during our Zoom meeting, right? Maybe we do surveys during the meeting. Maybe you send me that email afterwards asking me my thoughts and feelings on the meeting. What did I think? And this is a great place to organize your unstructured data. So we did similar surveys at ASAE, asking people about how they use data and what they do with it. And we took all those answers and we dropped them in our visualization tool, because the typical process is, well, they were in that PowerPoint that Bill showed 9 months ago. It's in your email somewhere, right? It's in Teams. You're like, I don't know where that went. I have no idea what the answer was. But if we've centralized all of our data in a data warehouse and we've pulled all that data into visualizations in Acumen, that's always at my fingertips. I can now compare the survey results we got at annual to next year and the year after and the year after. And then we can start to build trends and see how all of this data is changing. Let's not forget the unstructured data. As Dave was showing the abstract submission process, one thing jumped out at me is that description, right? Describe what you're submitting. Upload a PDF with 10 pages of content that the graders are going to read, but I'm not actually looking at every piece of data that's typed, all that unstructured data. I'm not always pulling all that together. Then you think about the chat that's flying by. Are we going to read every chat from every session that happened? Probably not. So the idea here is pulling that unstructured data together, using some interesting things like natural language processing to be able to determine what people are talking about, but then apply sentiment analysis on top of that to say, are the people talking about positive or negative things? So we can start to get better ideas, better trends, better topics coming out of our sessions by analyzing the data that occurred in those sessions.
A quick comment, Greg. Actually, I have a question for David. So when thinking back to the discussion about abstract submissions, how does OpenWater categorize or tag the content of that submission, right? Because I'm interested in what topics are popular, among the abstracts, because that can help inform how I'm going to plan the sessions and the overall content for my meeting.
Yeah, typically that is categorized by category. That was a weird sentence. Typically, categories are come up with by the association, and users self-select the category of their application.
Okay. So one thing that we've noticed in our experience is that the taxonomy and those different levels of categorization are maybe not as mature as we'd like them to be. And so that's one way to do it. Obviously, you can set up that taxonomy. You can ask your authors, when they submit their abstract, to self-select the topic or topics of that abstract. But the other thing that you can do is, with an analytics product, as Greg was describing, is you can actually just analyze the actual text of the abstract, and using algorithms, you can extract the keywords, which does two things. I mean, and you can do both, right? You can extract keywords and match those to your existing taxonomy, but there might be other, might be other trends and other keywords, other topics that weren't necessarily part of your taxonomy that could be really useful insights as well. Okay.
Thanks, Bill. I was reading the chat there. I'm looking for more ideas about data you want to collect from your virtual event or data you did collect from your virtual event. Now that you've seen a few of the things I'm showing today in the software, drop a comment in the chat. What's something you'd love to get out of your virtual event or some insight you'd love to know that you think's possible? We'd love to talk to you about that today in our session. One other main thing I wanted to talk about is the exhibitors, the sponsors, the advertisers that are coming to this event, that are participating in other ways. We've already talked a little bit about giving them data back with booth visits. Who visited the booth? How much time did they spend? What did they download from your virtual library? Did they look at your PDF or did they watch your video? All of that's critical data for us after the show. But before the show, you now have a wealth of information that's highly relevant to these exhibitors and sponsors. I used to sell sponsorships at an event, and when I talked to somebody and I said, Bill, you should totally exhibit at my event. I probably didn't say totally. I said, Bill, you should exhibit at my event. And the first question Bill would ask every time is, who's going to be there? Who am I exhibiting in front of? And my answer was lots of people. You definitely want to be there. I didn't have a great answer, but now I do have a really good answer. Let's think back to our registrant analysis. When we were talking about the types of people that are typically attending this event or the types of people that are attending this event. What a great answer to give that potential sponsor. I know that there's 4,000 buyers coming who are developers who want to buy software that you produce. And of those, 200 of them are first-time attendees who've never been here before. You're going to be able to get your product and service in front of 200 highly qualified buyers who want what you've exactly done, who've never seen you before, if you can participate in my event this year. I think that messaging is key to be able to get our sponsors excited about why they should be attending this next event. But we also need all the data to help understand what's going on with sponsorship. So similar analysis with sales. One of the things, I'm going to refresh this here just to give us some updated data. A few of the things I really like in exhibitor and sponsor analysis are things like spend analysis. If we're going to ask someone to participate in our event and to spend money with us, how much should they be spending at our event? How much have they spent at our event in the past? So we can do spend analysis, looking at the types of sponsors you've had in the past, the types of things they've bought from you, and the types of money they spent. If I'm talking to someone from the private sector, I anticipate they're going to spend on average this much. I anticipate these are the types of things they're going to buy. These are the packages they've had in the past. Similar concept with my sponsorship. If someone's buying a sponsorship from me, what type of sponsorship are they buying? How often are they buying that? We talked about attendee loyalty. We really need sponsor loyalty. How often do exhibitors come back time and time again, or sponsors come back time and time again? Are we seeing more or less from specific industries? And ultimately, what does an organization's participation with us look like? When an organization participates, how often are they generating, this much revenue? What types of things are they buying? If we can pull all that together, we can do a better job of understanding our exhibitors and sponsors, and we can do a better job of positioning our event in front of them to be able to ensure that they're getting the value they're looking for when they participate.
All right. Would you mind putting the deck back up, David? All right. Yeah, so this was, we can go to the next one. So we're talking about leveraging data. And so that really brings us to our questions and closing thoughts. So we had a lot of questions in the chat throughout the session. If anyone has anything else, now would be a good time to go ahead and put that into the chat, and we will discuss it. But while we're waiting for anything to come in, I'm going to pose this to both David and Greg. So first for David, I guess, one thing that I'd be wondering if I was watching this and seeing a lot of cool things that you showed, maybe I did my 2020 virtual conference kind of on a shoestring, right? I did it at the last minute, and I want to do something different this year. What does it look like to get started, right? I mean, how does that process work?
Yeah, even what I'd recommend, it's like our biggest thing is that we want to make sure that we're working with associations who need what we do. So like we're not trying to do a square peg round hole mentality. Like we want to make sure there's a good fit here. So like even what I'd recommend doing is just, you can take a look at our website, getopenwater.com. You'll see some info about what we do. There'll be a request a demo link in there, and that'll be connected to me or a member of my team, and we'll walk through this with you. And really, like what we typically do is spend a good chunk of time talking through what your conference normally looks like in person, what it looked like virtually last year if you did something, and then kind of a little bit tailored of like what OpenWater can do to help you specifically, if anything.
All right. And for Greg, I mean, what if you're going to offer one or two key takeaways, as it relates to virtual event planning and analytics and business questions that you can derive from that, what do you think is most important?
Great question. I think we could spend a whole hour just answering that.
For sure.
My advice would be begin with the end in mind. Start with the outcomes you're looking for and build a plan to achieve and measure those outcomes. Is our outcome maximizing revenue for the event and making as much money as we can? Is our goal engaging the members and the non-members and just making sure that the industry as a whole benefits from us? Is our goal ensuring that sponsors continue to participate with us and get visibility in front of our members? Is our goal just to get people credits and have them renew their credits, right? As Dave sort of talked about, we want to help you achieve your goals, but if you can't clearly articulate the goals, you can't measure them and you can't see how you're doing towards them, you can't put a strategy in place to be able to achieve those goals. So I always think it's really important as we begin any project to sort of write down, what are our goals with this project? Is it to get as many people to the event as possible? Is it to maximize our revenue? Is it to do maybe a combination of all of those? And we want to create a dashboard to be able to measure each one of those things as we move forward. But I would say the most important thing is collecting the data, right? The data that is generated from our event is huge. Even if you don't know what you're going to do with that data, start collecting it. Because the one thing you're going to do is you're going to kick yourself in a few years from now that you don't have the data from those past few years because you weren't collecting it. So I would say collect the data. Even if you don't have goals, you'll have the data there to answer those goals. But a best case scenario is, what are we hoping to achieve? And if you don't have an answer, ask your boss. And if they don't have an answer, ask the board, right? What are we trying to achieve with our events this year? And how do we really make sure that we're working towards those goals and we're being successful with those goals?
All right. Yeah, I would just add one thing to that. Greg's point about collecting data, it's a good one. We have a lot of conversations about data collection generally, and like how to sort of balance, needing a lot of data and then sort of asking for too much and kind of, causing fatigue among your members. A lot of that goes away in virtual, I would say. So there's a lot more opportunities to collect a lot more data, with a virtual session than you would have with a live session, right? I mean, the things that would be annoying, doing it live are just it's a lot more painless in the virtual setting. So that can help as well. So we go to the last one, David. So so coming up, this is our next session. Oh my gosh, the date there is wrong. Today's obviously February 11th. So our next one is on the 25th, and that's going to be at 3 p.m. We're going to be joined by our friends from Ricochet, and they're going to be talking about modern marketing technology and analytics. And in fact, it's going to be a little broader than that. We'll talk about the overall technology ecosystem in your association. So thank you, Greg, and thank you, David, for a great discussion. Thanks for all the attendees, and look forward to seeing you all again in a few weeks.
All right, thanks. It was fun to be here.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Bill. We got some really fire questions in the chat here. If you want to stick around for an answer, I'd love to talk about those.
Yeah, let's do that.
Matthew's question here is something I've talked with a ton of people about. So the question is, people who prefer those in-person events, how do we get networking to really work for them? They can chat in the app, they can talk with other people, they can go to sessions. How do we really get them to participate in the networking that we know is so important at our conference, right? That bump into you in the hallway sort of meeting, that hang out at the bar and talk to people who I know. How do we replicate that? I've had some really honest conversations with people who say, I go for the networking and I can't get it in the virtual world. I stopped going. I was invited to 30 conferences this year, and it just kills my schedule because I sit in calls all day, but I don't get to do the exciting things I want, which is the networking. How do we do that better? And I think that's a real big challenge that we're all running into. Bill or David, any successes you've seen from events you've attended, or David, any?
Yeah,
yours?
a lot of it is just, it's harder to have that spontaneity happen. And like the customers we've had that have been really successful at it, their meeting planners have gone out of their way to encourage this. What a lot of people have done is, even, I'm sure everyone here has been on a 30-person Zoom call with your extended family, and it's just kind of a nightmare trying to have a conversation. So people are looking at going wide. People are finding, for just small, maybe a 20-minute session, they might have 10 of them running at once with someone interesting, either from the association, a board member, someone interesting, researcher, personality in the field that members might want to talk to. And then it's first come, first serve, maximum of 10 people. And like, we've seen things like that been really effective at having conversation happen. But I think Matt is definitely right, of just having a tool enabled to chat almost isn't enough. There has to be some programming as well.
I mean, they've all left, so we can say it. We have a tool relevant for chat here, and we tried our hardest to get people to chat, and it didn't occur at the level we wanted, right? So
Yeah.
How do we get that fire to happen? That's the question.
Yeah, I was just going to add that
We'll cut that out of the video.
what we've seen in our data is that historically there's not that big of an overlap between individuals that go to live events versus those that go to virtual. And so something happened, right? This year, there was no such thing as live events. So that kind of forced a lot of people that wouldn't otherwise, have done that, to participate and to try out networking in a virtual setting. And I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of partial to that anyway, but I think that's that we'll see an uptick in that, in the subsequent years, as a result of that, right? Because they might never have tried it.
Yeah. A couple things I would think of is, if you have an online community, use that to your advantage. Bill and I were talking about how it would be great if we could follow up our webinars with a seated conversation in an online community we're all a part of, to pick up the conversation there, because we all might want to share videos or screenshots of our analytics or thoughts we have 2 days from now, right? I think that could be a really good use case for how do we get people to network. Maybe it doesn't happen during the Zoom call or during the meeting. Maybe we push people into a community where instead of having synchronous conversations, we're having semi-real-time conversations in a forum setting or a listserv or a chat. I think the other thing I would encourage is give people a way to participate that doesn't feel like forced participation. So a good example is, we're all going to get into rooms of 10 and we're going to talk. Well, what are we going to talk about when we get there? We should have a plan ahead of time on what we're going to talk about. Is there a moderator? Is there a guided conversation? Are there seed questions? Seed questions go a long way to getting the conversation going. We've done a lot of these webinars where the chat blows up, and it's because we have people on there who are getting the conversation started early that makes other people feel comfortable that they can chat. Or my other recommendation is, have an activity that has absolutely nothing to do with your conference, with the goal of getting people to engage. Let's go play a game. Let's sing karaoke together. Let's play bingo. Let's have a trivia night. And we're going to break up in groups, and you're all going to get together and you're going to do these activities together, where the goal is we're doing the activity, but what's really occurring is we're networking, we're talking, we're meeting with people, and it doesn't really feel forced because we're all excited to play that trivia game, or we're excited to sing bad karaoke on Zoom together. The whole reason we can have that conversation is because there's things to talk about. That last question we got, how bad Greg's singing was, that is the seed of the engagement that we're looking for. So I'd say it's not if you build it, they'll come, right? You got to have a strategy and a plan in place ahead of time. How are we going to facilitate these conversations? What are they going to talk about? What if we open up the conversation and no one says anything? Then what do we do? Right? We need to have that plan in place ahead of time. If we want to have positive conversations, we've got to find those social media butterflies and get them in those rooms ahead of time. Hey, we know this person's huge on social media with us. They're one of our moderators in the room. They know how to get a conversation going. Those are keys that we should be thinking about ahead of time. It goes back to that plan for what you're looking for, and then build a strategy on how to get there. And if I want people to have conversations, I've got to have things to talk about.
Yeah, that's a great point. So really quick, let me, I I see Laura is still on here and she asked a question a few minutes ago. Let me just quickly address that before she hangs up on us here. So the idea of managing and standardizing data from larger virtual conferences or even larger live conferences with smaller ones, that kind of gets back to that idea of summarizing your data at the right level of granularity. And what I mean by that is you have your data and you can organize it by individual, in which case it might be very relevant to see how Greg engaged with your small conferences versus your large virtual conferences. But then, and you'll have all that data and there'll be dashboards to do exactly that. We didn't talk about engagement scoring today, for a change, but that's a big part of it, engagement across all different types of activities. So you would bucket those out separately. But then the other way is your events are also categorized, by size, by category, by type, by format. And so you probably really wouldn't, look at the data for the small conferences right alongside your big annual conferences. You would group them with similar types and then look at trends among that type of data. But I mean, you certainly could, but typically that's one of the values in having a system like Acumen or any data warehouse is to segment, all of your events into the groups that are similar for analysis.
And I think you said it earlier, Bill, that the people who come to your large conference may not be the same types of people who come to your small conferences, and that's okay. Yeah, sure. We want to identify, does that overlap exist or not? And if so, who are those natural populations that are more likely to come to our big event or more likely to come to our smaller event? How do we plan better events for them based on the data? And how do we market our next event based on the data? If Bill is a virtual guy and he always comes to our webinars, why do I keep hammering him about the physical event, right? And if Greg loves to come to our physical events and has never shown up at a webinar, why do I send him an email every day about our webinar series he's not attending?
Right. All right. Great. Well, thanks again to a few people that hung around this long. Really appreciate it. And feel free to reach out to any of us on the call, or I encourage you to get in touch with OpenWater as well if you like the platforms that they showed. So thank you very much, and hope to see everyone soon.
Final thought: pivot, pivot, pivot.